Hi, and welcome to Nevaeh's Nightmare. Okay, so on this channel, we are going to be covering true crime, conspiracies, paranormal, aliens, and just everything in that category. But on today's episode, we are going to be talking about the cases of Betty and Barney Hill and Travis Walton. So, the first case we'll be covering is the case of Betty and Barney Hill. On the evening of September 19th, 1961, Betty and Barney were on their way home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire after a vacation in Montreal and Niagara Falls. As they were driving, Betty spotted a light that was in the air pacing behind their car, so they stopped and they got out to get a closer look at it, and as they were looking through the binoculars, they noticed it was oddly shaped. Barney felt that it might have been an airplane, but he kept looking through his binoculars. So they got back in the car, and the craft continued to follow them. The craft continued to follow them until it swooped behind some trees and mountains and then appeared directly in front of them, in front of their car in the middle of the highway. The mysterious craft hovered above them and Betty looked through the binoculars and seemed to appear 11 occupants looking back at her. All of a sudden, they heard a voice that said, "Stay where you are and keep looking." This caused the couple to panic, and as they were driving, they felt they were entering some kind of altered state of consciousness, and this weird tingling sensation passed through their bodies. Eventually, they realized they had driven 35 miles with no memory of the distance that they had driven. When the Hills returned to their home, they were perplexed over what had just happened, and they began to exhibit some odd behavior. They took very long showers because they felt they had been somehow contaminated, and they both began to have unusual dreams about the events that took place on the craft. Betty especially had some interesting dreams that were very vivid and almost felt like memories to her. These memories slowly started to come back to them. They remembered being on a field not too far from the road, and Betty could see Barney in front of her walking, almost sleepwalking towards the craft, and he was conversing with some beings that was off to the side of them. The beings she describes were about 5 feet 5 inches tall, and they wore matching black and blue uniforms. She described their skin as gray in color, and they looked very human in appearance. Betty remembered being taken into the craft, and her and Barney were separated for some kind of examination. Betty was examined by someone that she called the examiner, who spoke to her in English, but Betty was told she would be being examined to try to understand what was the difference between them and human beings. He ran multiple tests on Betty, including which of one involved shoving a needle into her belly button. Betty noticed a book with strange symbols on it, and the leader said that she could take it home with her. When she asked the leader where they came from, he pulled down a star chart with a map, and he pointed out a star system that they were from. Later on, Betty would undergo hypnosis, and some have speculated that it represents the strange occupants that came from the star system, Zeta Reticuli. After having these dreams, Betty and Barney started talking openly about their experiences and their encounters, and it came to the attention of psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon. Simon hypnotized the Hills, and all of a sudden they remembered much more of what happened of the incident. Barney described a much more horrifying description than his wife. He underwent some excruciatingly painful examinations, and the way that his abductors looked also changed as well. They were much more alien-like, now with small mouths and larger eyes, and Barney claimed that they communicated to him via telepathy. Simon later concluded that it was all a fantasy brought up by their encounter with the unidentified object, as well as influence from Betty's dreams. So what can be said about the Betty and Barney Hill case? Some believe that the Hills had an actual encounter with the beings from the Zeta Reticuli. Others, like Dr. Simon, concluded that it was a shared fantasy brought on by the stress of being a mixed-race couple in the early 1960s. Some skeptics have even pointed out an episode of a popular TV show called The Outer Limits, which featured an alien being aired 12 days before they had their encounter. As proof, it was all just a delusion. Still, others speculate that the Hills were victims of a government mind control program called the MK Ultra, and they were targeted because they were civil rights workers. Whatever the case may be, the Hills' experience set the stage for the modern age era of the alien abduction and gives birth to what we now know as the Greys. On November 5th, 1975, Travis Walton and 6 other men were working on cutting down trees for lumber in the Apache Stigreaves National Forest near the small town of Snowflake, Arizona. Their work came to a halt around dusk, and the men packed their equipment and started to head out to the foreman Mike Rogers' truck. As they were driving home through the forest, they noticed a bright light shining through the trees off to the side of the vehicle. Travis, who was feeling rather adventurous, asked Mike to stop. He got out of the truck and started walking towards the light. There was a hovering craft that appeared right in front of them and everyone watched as Travis approached it. All of a sudden, a beam of light came out of the craft and knocked Travis down on the ground. Thinking that Travis was dead, the other men started yelling for Mike to floor it, and when they kept driving, they realized they needed to stop and come back for Travis. After a little bit of their frightening discussion, when they got back to the site, both the craft and Travis were nowhere to be found. Having no other choice, the men sped back to the town of Snowflake and alerted the sheriff's department of what had happened to Travis. On some disbelief on the sheriff's end, he still organized a search party. The search party failed to show any sign of Travis for the next 5 days. Suspicious that the men were using the UFO encounter as a possible cover-up for Travis's murder, the sheriff arranged for the men to have a polygraph test done. All but one of the men passed the test with no issues for the next few days. And an air of suspicion lingered in the sheriff's mind. On the evening of the 5th day, Travis's brother was at home with his family when his phone rang. On the other end of the line, it was Travis calling from a payphone somewhere on the highway on the outskirts of town. When Travis's brother arrived to take him home, Travis was visibly shaken by whatever he had endured over the last 5 days and nights. After he had recovered from his ordeal, he began to recover some of the memories from the last 5 days. Travis remembered being hit by a beam of light and passing out, and as he came to, he realized that he was in a strange setting that he did not recognize at all. He got up and looked around the room, and he felt as if he was in some kind of small control room, and all of a sudden 3 small figures entered the room. They had large foreheads and small black eyes. Travis panicked and grabbed something close to him that looked like a pipe and started waving it at the beings. The beings turned around and promptly fled. Perplexed and a little confused, Travis exited the room and he began to walk down a very long corridor. And at the end of the corridor, he encountered what appeared to be a humanoid wearing a space helmet. This made him feel a little bit more at ease compared to the other beings. Travis ran up to him, asking him a bunch of questions about where he was and who they were, but the humanoid didn't respond. He silently beckoned for Travis to follow him. The humanoid took Travis down what appeared to be another long corridor, and then down to what appeared to be an elevator. The door opened, and Travis walked down a ramp with the being into a hangar with 3 flying saucers sitting in it. They walked into another room where 2 men and a woman were sitting around a table. Travis asked the same questions, but this time in a more panicked state. And he was getting no response. They motioned him to get on the table, and he did. As Travis asked them more questions, the woman silently picked up what appeared to be an oxygen mask. She placed it over his face, and the next thing he knew, he woke up in the woods. He gathered his wits, and he walked to the highway where he found a payphone and called his brother. So what can we make of the Travis Walton case? Travis himself has never wavered or altered his story at all, and he's still very persistent about what happened to him in 1975. The other 6 men have never wavered or changed their story either. The sheriff still believes that there was some kind of hoax or scam or crime that was perpetrated, but some skeptics look at the airing of a TV movie about the hills called the UFO incident as an inspiration for the men to fake the news of Travis's abduction. The Walton case is one of the most famous UFO and alien abduction stories in history. In 1993, it even inspired a movie called The Fire in the Sky. It is also one of the last abductions to feature humanoid beings. From that point in the 80s and onwards, people would be abducted from their beds, from their cars, wherever they were, by these little terrifying beings called the Greys. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Also, make sure you check back in for part 2, where we will be examining the researcher Bud Hopkins.